Welcome to the Hi-Fi of Customer Experience podcast brought to you by cxmlab.com. It will be a short, sharp, and interactive podcast with some of the best minds in the business, and we will take 5 key questions. CXM Lab is a platform to express thoughts, ideas, and tools that drive customer experience and will enable marketers, CIOs, CTOs, and CDOs to think, reflect, and make the right choices for their brands and organizations. For more insights, you can log on to cxmlab.com. Our guest today is Neela Saldana. Neela has more than 15 years of experience in the private sector across consumer insights, branding, strategy, consulting, and sales. She has worked with leading consumer packaged goods multinationals like Nestle, Unilever, PepsiCo, and with strategic consulting firms like Accenture. Neela has an MBA from IIM Calcutta and a PhD in marketing, consumer psychology from the Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania. And most importantly, she has done extensive work in the space of advancing and applying behavioral science. She's also one of the founding director of the Center for Social and Behavioral Change at the Ashoka University. Welcome, Neela, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Neela, you had an interesting journey with MNCs like Nestle, Unilever, Pepsi, working on branding, strategy, consulting, then with Accenture, and then investing a lot of time in the field of behavioral economics. What has been the journey like, and what prompted you to make those transitions?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually came to the field of behavioral economics from marketing. That's not typically how you often think about behavioral economics. You think about either psychology or economics, which is, what behavioral economics is. But surprisingly, a lot of insight has come from marketing and marketing departments. So if you actually think about some of the earlier papers that Richard Thaler wrote on fairness with Daniel Kahneman and Jack Nesh, it was actually published in a marketing journal. Yeah. And if you think about Dan Ariely, also is in marketing departments at Duke along with psychology. So I started my career in India very, I would say pretty conventionally. After my MBA, joined the food industry. I love food, so joined Nestle and then Unilever. And then I thought I wanted to explore some of these questions a little more broadly, so joined Accenture. And after about 7 or 8 years of working, I think my growing frustration was that we didn't have theory-based answers to anything. Most of the answers we had were based on anecdote and experience. Yeah. And I wasn't sure that was exactly the right thing. I was thinking it would be great if we had some evidence-driven answers, the way science does. And fortunately, when I was at Accenture for a project that we were doing, I managed to read a couple of academic papers. And I thought, oh, wow, there is actually a field of marketing where people study these questions quite scientifically. So I applied to business school, still with very little idea about behavioral economics. And I thought consumer behavior sounds interesting. It's what I do. And I went in thinking I went in to get a PhD in marketing, thinking that A, I was going to become a professor, and B, that I was going to study about things like brand strategy and, brands and categorization and strategic marketing. And I went in, and my first sort of lecture I still remember was, the first course was consumer behavior. And we had to read these really theoretical papers on how people process information and, the dual processing, which later became System 1, System 2. Initially, I couldn't see the connection, but now looking back, and even then, I thought that why didn't we learn this? This is so foundational, because you can always learn about how to apply marketing and brand strategy, but if you don't understand how people actually process information, how they make choices, how they make judgments, how the choice architecture influences their judgments, then you can't actually be an effective marketer. And so that was my journey. And fortunately, it was at a time, I think I graduated in 2010. And it was at a time when behavioral economics was actually exploding in mainstream. So, marketing, consumer behavior, social psychology, even behavioral economics had been around in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But it was in departments, in academic departments. And for the first time, I think around that time, Dan Ariely published Predictably Rational. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein published Nudge. Actually, even before that, Malcolm Gladwell published Blink, which was based on a lot of now non-replicated work on priming. So, and that really brought, I think, social psychology into the mainstream, books like that. So there was this spurt of publishing of books in the mainstream. And I think that really got into people's consciousness, as well as the establishment of nudge units, both in the UK and in the US. As well as tech companies then suddenly starting to use some of this experimentation, which they'd already been doing, A/B testing. So it all came together. And so therefore, just to say that behavioral economics as we know it, or behavioral science, is a relatively young field. It's actually not that, it's not more than, in the sense of being popular and in the sense of being applied in mainstream industry, is about, 20 years old, maybe, if that. So that was really my journey. And then most recently, and so after I got my PhD, I did not become a marketing professor, but I went back into industry and joined Pepsi in New York. And I think it was very interesting to see what I could apply of what I had learned in theory to an extremely well-run, sophisticated marketing company. And I think that really made me think about, what were some of the more obvious things that marketers already knew, and what were some of the things that where behavioral science and this study actually can complement marketing. And that was very exciting. We sort of set up a little mini kind of nudge unit to get in PepsiCo, to get consumers to pick the healthier options in the PepsiCo portfolio. And then 3 years ago, I made the transition again to the development sector, which is where I joined the Center for Social and Behavior Change, to see how we could use behavior science to advance problems around global poverty. How do you get people to take their vaccines or take their folic acid supplements to combat anemia, or get them to wash their hands, etc. And that's where I am right now. So it's been a meandering journey, starting with pure marketing, getting this PhD, applying it to business, and then moving into the social sector.
I think it's been a fantastic journey, and I've been kind of observing what you've been doing over the last couple of years from a distance, and I really admire what you do. And I come from an advertising background, and we kind of apply a lot of tenets of behavioral science intuitively and instinctively, without realizing. And we say, this is my gut feeling, or this is what I think is a powerful idea, but to bring a method to the madness and have an actual marketeer's perspective to this whole thing, and ensure that it really translates into a meaningful strategy which pays off for the brands, is pretty nascent. As you said, it's a 20-year-old business. And when we started out in advertising, we kind of spoke about it, and you rightly referred to Blink and some of the reference points which kind of worked for us. But behavioral economics and its application has now seen a big impact, as you mentioned, in government nudge units, especially in the US and the UK, and development agencies which you are working with. But its impact on understanding and influencing consumer behavior to drive purchase decisions is yet to be explored, in my mind, to its full potential. What is your take on this, Neela?
So, it's interesting. Having been based in the US for many years, I actually think that isn't necessarily the case here. And I think that it is actually exploding in the private sector. But it's interesting. I don't see that as much in India. You're completely right. It has not taken root in India. So in the US, I think it started a lot with big tech, Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc., using these tenets of behavioral science. And there are two parts to, I think, behavioral science. There's the content, as you rightly said. There's the vocabulary, there's the precision, there's the content and the ideas. And then there's the method. So behavioral science, behavioral economics overwhelmingly relies on the experimental method to establish causality, what we would call, say, A/B testing, right? And so the experimental method, I think, it was already being carried out by the tech companies. It's always been part of their DNA.
Yeah.
In a way, I think that it was less so in, say, for example, the CPG companies that I was in, where most of the consumer insight was based on surveys and really just getting qualitative insight, but you would not do a lot of A/B testing.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, I think, I spent many years in Pepsi, is not because of lack of will or people don't want to do it. It's just the platforms are much harder. Once you get offline, running an experiment is not a trivial task, getting the right sample size. it's much easier to do with digital platforms. And digital till recently had not been part of a lot of companies' portfolio. E-commerce was not their biggest sort of driver, it was still offline. So it started with tech companies. A lot of finance, insurance, banking has actually taken it up. So you've seen, a lot of my colleagues who work in finance, insurance, banking, and in the US, in healthcare, in as much as it's very complicated, and how do you actually pick the right, again, health insurance? Yeah. That's where it's really picked up. I think it's relatively, you're right, it's been nascent in the CPG industry, in consumer packaged goods, or FMCG as we would call it. In India, I have to say, yes, I was in India recently for 2 years while we were setting up the center, and there is a lot of interest. I think there are 2 or 3 reasons. One is that the US has had years of institutional educational advances in behavioral science. So you have a critical mass of trained behavioral scientists who are academics who now want to take their research into the wider world. And they've been the ones who've catalyzed some of this work, right? So that infrastructure does not yet exist in India. We don't have that, we don't have universities with that kind of critical mass of trained behavior scientists. We don't have labs. One of the luxuries when I was doing my PhD at Wharton was the presence of a lab where I could just run a study anytime I wanted to. We don't have that. So if I have to think of running an experiment, it's really hard to do. I have to figure out how to do it all on my own. And the community is growing, but it's still very, very tiny in terms of sharing experiences or sharing things. So I think that also the second hypothesis I have, I don't know how accurate it is I think a lot of behavior science, even in the US, has been used in optimization. And that makes a lot of sense when you're in a large, stable market fighting for, a few percentage points of market share. Every little bit of framing and choice architecture really counts. In India, I think was primarily a growth market for a long time. So this is, while people acknowledge this is interesting, it just seems like, there are other things to chase. There's growth, and growth is not necessarily just about marketing, it's also about execution and supply and so on. And as long as there's that, I think the organization is sort of less attuned. So I think these 2 reasons, lack of infrastructure, by which I mean even trained people, platforms, etc. And then the second part is actually maybe the need has been less in that sense. But now I think with the recession, with the idea that things will get tight, there is going to be more of this idea of how can we optimize our existing resources. So I actually expect to see a big increase in the next few years.
Yes. Neela, I'm a data-driven marketer working on multiple industries, from banking, mutual fund to automotive to retail, which is actually struggling big time over the last 6 months. Straddling many different customer behaviors. And I cannot but empathize enough on the need for fusing data science with behavioral science. You spoke about choice architecture. We design customers' journeys here, but I think choice architecture is never really a part of that journey at all. It's a very linear journey. Okay, he's going to come to my website, he's going to go to my retail outlet, or he's going to be on social media outlets. How is it going to be? But the choice part is kind of never really focused on, and that's where the crux of the matter is. Have you seen this being effectively put in practice by any brands and organizations?
Absolutely. Recently Google did a very interesting study in which they looked at the sort of 6 biases in the purchase decision process, and how you could actually get people to complete that purchase process. You're completely right. I think one of the biggest applications in behavioral science is the intent to behavior gap. I think traditionally as marketers, we expected that we would create intent, through advertising and motivation, and then we would have availability for sure. I think a lot of FMCGs, for example, really talked about the importance of availability. But then we sort of assume that once we're given those 2 things, people will automatically just pick up our product. And we know that that's not true. And there is significant drop off. People enter a car showroom, they don't end up buying the car. People enter a supermarket, they don't necessarily end up buying your product. I think you're exactly right that that's a clear place where behavior science can work. But more importantly, I see it's a clear place where the integration of data science and behavior science can work. because I think without granular level data, what we've discovered with behavior science, and you see that in the sort of replication crisis, as people call it, where many studies can't be replicated. My hypothesis is it's not that the effect is not replicated, it's just that it doesn't replicate across an entire population, which makes sense. You don't expect that everyone will behave exactly the same way to one change in the framing of what you do. I think the real potential for behavior science is when we combine data science and behavior science, when we think of multiple segments along that customer journey, and we think about what, and we have what I call personalized nudges to those multiple segments. I mean, in an ideal world it should be customized 1:1. For your personal journey I will have a set of things, but that is where I see the future. So I do think that of course, like, again, I go back to the Amazons and I go back to the Googles, because I think they do an excellent job. Some of it not always for good. Netflix's keep browsing button, is a great example of using inertia. There's been a lot of backlash now, and they're rethinking it, or they've rethought it. But I think that a lot of companies are actually starting to use this to convert intent to action. And I think that's a clear case where you can use some of the insights around choice architecture, around context, around inertia and procrastination, goal progress, to actually habits, to actually drive some of this change.
Absolutely, absolutely. Leela, you straddled both the academia and the practical and the professional world. There's always been a wall that kind of exists. It's a kind of unsaid rule, and it's been around for a very long time. And you see a lot of opinions being floated in that context. Do you believe that things have changed dramatically, especially from a behavioral science perspective? And if yes, what are the changes that you've seen?
So I definitely see more academics interested in disseminating their work for a wider audience. I think, it's just been the success of the books and established authors. So almost every couple of months now, you see an academic writing a book, and written in a very engaging style. So not an academic kind of book, but a book that you can actually pick out. I do think there is a move, you've seen the Lipsoman CDX course. There's a move to do some of this and get better outreach. And you find more academics, I think, involved in, I think they've always been involved in consulting in some way, but now you see a few of these centers. So the center at Toronto, there's a center at Yale that, I work closely with when both in the private and development sector, the Yale Center for Customer Insights. Carnegie Mellon has now started one, Harvard has one. So you have all the big universities in the US now thinking about setting up these kinds of centers, because they see this kind of work. I definitely think there is appetite, but you're right, the academic professional gap is quite wide. And what happens, I think, so there are two things, I think, and I always say this, as a professional, I look upon a problem like a brand manager. And in order to increase market share, you have to do 100 things. You can't just do one thing. As an academic, my incentive is to think of one silver bullet idea and then publish it in a conference, right? And that's what gets. So I might publish my idea about how loss framing helps, but loss framing is only one of 2,000 things that I would do as a brand manager. So I think it's really important to keep in perspective for folks interested in behavior science on the practitioner side, is that you use these principles as they relate to your problem, without falling in love with just behavior science as it's a tool, it's a means to get somewhere. It's not necessarily the right tool for every problem that you have. And use it in a way that you would use other knives in your drawer. And therefore, your dealings with academics should really be much more nuanced, rather than saying, come and help me solve my brand management problem. No, you are the brand manager, you will solve that problem. You need to define that, you need to figure out what you're missing, and then reach out to the right academics. From the academic side, I would push them to have more experience, I think. Interestingly enough, you don't need work experience even in business schools to become a business school professor. So I think that's why often you'll see academics who are fairly theoretical. And so, there is always a push to get them to, and it's not in their incentive structure. to do this work, right? To get tenure, it's really about publications. The good news, I think, is that what I've seen working with academics is they were quite interested in working on problems. They actually are, and it's not. They're not often driven by, they're very interested in the problem itself, and they'll spend many hours, even though they're often expensive to hire. They'll actually spend time because they want to solve the problem, not that, oh, I just told you I would do X hours of work and here's my deliverable. So I find it quite, especially they get engaged in what you do. I think a good role is for someone in the organization or in firms like yours to play what I call a translator role, where you link the academic to the professional. That's a role I often played in Pepsi and even now, because I understand the academic literature and because I understand the problems of industry. Often you need someone to link those two and say, here's what might be relevant in this vast academic literature to your particular problem. And similarly to the academics to say, here are elements of the problem that might be. We need many more of those, which comes back to my original point, is we need more trained behavioral scientists who actually haven't only got their learning from reading the books, but have gone to the primary source material, have actually read the papers and interacted with it.
No, absolutely. You hit it on the head, Neela. Basically, even when I go out to colleges and I talk to the students, I think they are hugely interested in the practical side of business, and that really kind of creates a relatable situation for them, moving away from the academic part of the exercise. All of us have heard of the marshmallow experiments, group task, and stuff like that, and we kind of relate to it. But to have practical examples put in front of them is actually the key to building knowledge and building capabilities. I think is a core part of it.
I agree. That said, I think one wish I would have, and I recently taught a course and I've interacted with students, is to push yourself to think theoretically. I think we're so focused on what's the practical value of this thing. You don't get that unless you spend a couple of years just understanding the theory. And sometimes it might seem like it's a waste of time. And we're often conditioned. Maybe it's our educational system. Maybe it's the fact that we're impatient. Like, just give me the practical example. I would say you're not getting the best out of behavioral science if you just immediately focus on what is the practical application of this. So understanding dual processing theory, even if you think that I can't use it right away, is really important because it helps you to understand the mind of the consumer. And then you might be able to use it someday or use some form of that. So I would actually push students the other way around. Don't ask about the practical significance of something. Don't ask for examples. Figure out your own examples over time, but spend a couple of years just reading the literature, engaging with it, understanding it, even if all the experiments are about red and green M&Ms, and really just understanding the constructs, the terms, the experiments, and the technical part. And the second sort of advice I would give, especially to students and even emerging professionals, is learn the technical aspects. Learn how to be. So this isn't what you see in the books is an output of a lot of technical work, a lot of well-run experiments, a lot of data. Now we're getting into field experiments or looking at big data. And I would say spend time getting really comfortable with that. Because then you will move beyond level one, which is I know about optimism bias and I know about scarcity bias and how to apply it, and really start using some of those principles in a much deeper way.
Absolutely, and that's the contrary point of view. I think it's very valuable. I think we often get lost in the outcomes before really understanding the foundational stuff that goes into it. In that context, what are the skill sets, Neela, required to be a successful behavioral scientist, and how does one go about acquiring those skill sets? And I would like you to address it in two parts. So one is you're already a professional. You already say a data-driven professional working in the data space, and you swear and you live by the data that you see in front of your screen all the time. But then how do you imbibe the behavioral aspect of it, and how do you get the left brain and right brain to kind of work together to create some more magic from a business perspective?
I think actually it's easier if you're a data-driven professional, I have to say, because I think the harder skill in some ways is to pick up some of those, quantitative skills, and people often shy away from that. So you've already got a good foundation because you can actually test out and see whether the principles work in reality. So I would say in that sense, being a good scientist is really about being a good behavioral scientist is about being a good scientist, developing hypothesis, not being confident about your beliefs. And again, this is something which is quite contrary in the business world, where we have to project confidence. But to be a behavioral scientist, you have to say, I don't know, but I'm hypothesizing this. Or this, I know that defaults have worked in 33 countries, but it still might not work in your situation. So you have to get really comfortable with that, I think. And really have that curiosity to test out your principle, and also being prepared for the fact that it might not come out in your case the way that it is. So that's a mindset change, I think, in that sense, being really humble about what you're getting and just practicing that and looking at it. In terms of the content skills, yes, there's vast amount of content. And it's not just that. I do want to say that behavior science has sort of expanded beyond behavioral economics and choice architecture, right? Mm-hmm. So things like goals, identity, habits, social norms are now all being regarded as part of behavior science. Yeah. So you really do need to pick up that content skill. Unfortunately, there are not too many ways to do that other than a formal sort of master's kind of qualification. But for the dedicated behavioral scientist, I think, immersing yourself, starting with the books, they're still easier to get into than the papers themselves. And some of the courses, like I said, the EDX course on behavior science, but even some of the maybe basic social psychology courses. So a lot of behavioral science comes from social psychology and economics. So you might want to look at, of course, the behavior science courses. You might want to look at some open-ended social psychology courses, and then looking at a particular part of behavioral economics now deals with markets, incentives. There are some courses on that. So that's the content in terms of the social psychology. And as I've always maintained, you need to also get up to speed with at least understanding. You might say after studying this that I'm not going to be an experimentalist and that I'm not going to run my own experiments, but at least knowing enough as to what you want from an experiment. So I would say there are experimental methods, courses, things to learn. It's nothing more than, a lot of statistics and you did. So that's the technical aspect, I think. And that's a process of constant upskilling. I mean, even I am, going to go back and read some books and keep myself updated because the literature changes. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that it's an evolving science. Yeah. So as I said, a lot of what Malcolm Gladwell talked about in Blink has actually not been replicated. So you need to keep reading to make sure. There are some great publications, like there's Behavioral Scientist, which is an online publication. There's Habits Weekly. Those are all great because I think you understand. After some time of intensive reading, you sort of get to know who the authors are. Then you could get to the faculty pages, actually. They often actually have, and I would really urge people once they get past that level 1 to start reading the papers and start to get, more immersed in some of the work that gets done. So, that is really the content skill set. So there's a mindset skill set in terms of, being curious. There's a content skill set, join a local community group to keep talking about things. There are, especially in this pandemic, there are enough seminars going on that are free and open. So keep an eye out for those, follow people that you like or that might be interesting. I don't think there's any one way to get to it. And some of the people who've even written books have not had a PhD or an MS and just have gone straight away. The best way to do this is practice, practice, practice. Take your own data set, look at the questions that are interesting to you, try and find out, do a bit of research. Google is your best friend, and literally, get some understanding, apply it and see if that's changing something about what you're doing. And even if you don't have all the vocabulary exactly right, you'll have the principle, which is the most important part. So I do think, and I think always remember that data and behavior science is in pursuit of the problem. Like, don't lose that. So I see a lot of people don't get intimidated by jargon. I really dislike it when people start throwing around like random heuristics and biases. You know, this is this heuristic and this is that bias, because I don't think you can capture thinking so neatly. Heuristics and biases are just nice ways to show an effect, but they can't really explain a bias, or a heuristic could on hindsight explain many things. So just be wary when someone throws around a lot of that, and don't worry if you don't have all of that vocabulary. I think most important is to think through what is this problem, and what are some of the things that I could use. And the way that I use behavior science books or literature is literally to jot down ideas. So if a book has an idea about, let's say, the goal gradient hypothesis or goal progress, right? Now they've shown that, okay, if people get their 10th coffee, they are, we know about that, right? They like complete goals. So I think about, okay, that's interesting. Where does that apply in my problems that I'm looking for? And I think that sort of active thinking, taking an idea and then saying, how would I design an experiment or an innovation around this idea, is I think, hard, but it's probably the best learning. And actually thinking about, how do I design something completely different but has the same principle? So those are some of the things I think constant. It's a new field, so don't worry too much about whether you've learned everything. You'll never learn everything, and just constantly learning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neela. It was wonderful talking to you. I'm sure it'll be a great help to all our listeners from a behavioral science perspective. And of course, how do you fuse data science with behavioral science?
I'm very excited about that. So I would love to hear journeys of people fusing. I think it's the next frontier. And I would love to hear stories of people fusing together behavioral science and data science.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Have a great day. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.